Then click mute.
Awesome. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome. I am so glad to be here today, and I thank IDC and Society for Diversity for the opportunity to share my thoughts with you today on the topic of authenticity and communication, specifically building confidence in these spaces that we're navigating all the time. I'll introduce myself so you know who this is that's speaking with you today. My name is Dr. Shauna Gann, and I am the CEO and founder of True Culture Coaching and Consulting. I work with organizations and individuals as a business psychologist. So basically, what that means is I go in and help folks improve their not only the way that things are working in their organization, but interpersonal relationships and things. It's kind of like people hire consultants to come in and improve the bottom line. And I believe that the work that I do does that too, but it does so through the lens of its people. My background, though, I started in education as an elementary school teacher. I taught in the classroom for about 16 years, little ones. But for the second half of my career, I really did a lot of workshops and professional development for new teachers or even seasoned teachers who were having new experiences. And it was kind of going down that path that I discovered organizational leadership and decided to get into the field of industrial and organizational psychology, which is business psychology. It's not the same as clinical psychology. Again, it's really helping folks through coaching and consulting to be better leaders, to have more confidence in themselves, but also work together as an organization. I'm a certified diversity executive. I've been a member of Society for Diversity and have been with IDC now for 5 or 6 years, something like that. I'm also a certified professional DEI coach. So I work with executives, senior leaders, but also people at all different levels in their professional careers. But I do that through the lens of diversity, equity, inclusion, especially as I consider identities that are marginalized or when people feel like there's a spotlight on them or they're the first of someone in their position like them or the only one in their position that's like them. And I'm also a certified disc partner, so I work with assessments and use that in my coaching and my consulting and also as I deliver workshops and things like this. So just so you know a little bit more about me, I am from Anchorage, Alaska. That's my actual hometown. I grew up in Alaska. But right now I live in the DC metro area, just maybe 30 minutes south of DC proper in Northern Virginia. But in between there and here, I've been lots of places and I've spent 15 years out of the country, which really has informed a lot of the work that I do. So I lived in Italy for 5 years and then came back to the States for a year before moving with my family to Germany. And we lived in Berlin for 4 years. After that time, got on a plane and flew directly to Seoul, South Korea, where we lived for 3 years. Came back to the US and then did one final tour in the Czech Republic in the capital city of Prague. And it was there that I worked at the US Embassy. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my experience as an employee working in Prague a little bit later on today. I do some other stuff too. If you like podcasts, you might be interested in my podcast called Our True Colors that really focuses on what it's like when you don't fit into some particular social box, specifically racial, cultural, or ethnic ambiguity. So it's a great show, I think. It's on its fifth season, and I've had some really great conversations with guests. So I encourage you to check that out if you like podcasts and you're interested really in identity and belonging. But I also write a newsletter that's on LinkedIn. You can find it on my website too, called The Culture Clinic, where I really focus specifically on the workplace and bringing that human element. But I do that by looking at all aspects of our everyday life and even kind of tackle some stuff that people try to stay away from at workplace because it feels uncomfortable and taboo. And just because I am who I am, I thought I'd share a little fun something about me, which I'll tell you a little bit more about this later too. Before I did all this stuff that was in the black box and all of that, I was a music major, but I changed my major. I still try to find a way to incorporate music in my life. And right now, the major way that I do that is through karaoke. So if you're a karaoke fan, you can hit me up later on if you're in the area. I am always down for karaoke. And I do not believe you have to sing well. I just do it for fun. So that is a bit about me. And so now I think let's talk about what this session is going to cover today. Um, I think that in order to really understand authenticity and to talk about communication, we really have to start with who we are. And that means our identity, the power that we hold or don't hold, privileges that we have or don't have, but then also what gets in the way of authenticity. What are those barriers? And not only that, but if we can identify what those barriers are, how to claim our voice so that we can show up authentically, whatever that means to you. And there's one other thing I'd like to say here, and I'll talk about this a little bit later too, but it's not just about claiming your voice because maybe you'll find that you're a person that holds power and privilege in certain areas, and you have the opportunity to uplift and amplify the voices of others. And so, after talking about all of that, we'll come to discussion at the end. So I'd like to ask you to hold your questions, excuse me, questions until the end, just because of the sake of time. And I know I'll get some help to find your questions if I can't see them on my end, and we'll discuss that later on. This is an interactive session, so there are a couple of polls that I have, and there's going to be one coming up really soon. So if you have your phone nearby, please do grab your phone so that you can capture QR codes to participate. I really love participation, and it's anonymous. So don't worry, you don't have to put in your name. You can answer, and it will help us as we reflect on the discussion today, especially since we are in a webinar setting, and it's a good way for us to interact with one another. So get your phone ready. I use Slido. So this is the QR code that you can use. If you don't have your phone, but you're on a desktop or a laptop, you can open up a new tab on a browser and type in slido.com and then this code, and it will take you there. Please make sure, because there's two tabs. One says Q&A, and I'm not going to be checking, excuse me, I'm not going to be checking the Q&A questions on Slido. So make sure you're on the polls tab so that you can participate. All right. With that, let's go ahead and get started. But before we get into the content today, I think it's very important that we stop and think about what is happening in our lives today. And I think this is especially important when we are talking about topics that have to do with our identities. I always say we don't clock in and out of our identities every day, right? We bring who we are with us, whether we let that show or not. And that includes the stuff that's going on with us, around us, and so on. And there is a lot going on in our world today, in our country today. So I want you to stop and think, um, how are you showing up today? As you're like, what's your mindset? What comes to mind for you as we're about to dive into this discussion, this session about identity, about authenticity? There's a certain level of vulnerability there. So I want you to think about how you're arriving today and come up with a short word or phrase that best describes how you're arriving today and what's on your mind. Maybe you're feeling energized. Maybe you're tired. Maybe you're worried. Maybe you're confident. Productive is coming. Frustrated. Okay. I'm starting to see some come in. Intrigued. Let's get this out on the table. All right. Because the truth is, we're carrying this with us anyway. So I want you to take a breath and think about it. How am I showing up today? What is it about this topic that's speaking to me, and why is it important to me today? Right? There's going to be a lot of opportunities to reflect. And I think it's a good idea to just stop and think, how what you're feeling and what you're arriving with can impact what you take away today. So I'm going to move forward, but this can stay up. You can continue to add to this as we move on. But I want you to keep it in mind as we talk about who we are and how we show up or how we choose not to show up. All right. Here's just a few other things I see. Forgive me as I'm looking off to the side. I'm reading your responses here. Busy, scared, neutral. Some folks are reflecting. People are determined. And there is a big, giant word, overwhelmed. All of these are valid. So, getting into our topic about authenticity, let's start with authenticity. I have this little comic here. Have you ever heard someone at work, or maybe you've seen videos or memes or however it is, where people say, bring your true self to work, bring your authentic self to work? Everyone, please bring your true self to work, except Bob. Bob, we don't like your true self. Please continue to fake it. Thank you. Okay, so this is obviously tongue in cheek, but how many times do we show up not sure if we can bring our authentic selves or if it's safe to, or whether people want to see who we really are? So to kick things off, I have a little story for you. I told you that, the last place that I was overseas was in the Czech Republic, and also that I love karaoke. So I thought, why not tell you a little story that kind of combines the two of these? So I had a pretty good group of folks that I worked with, and my very first karaoke experience publicly, because I lived in Seoul, South Korea, so we would go to Noraebang, which was like the rooms, the closed rooms. That felt a little bit more safe, but this was the first time I'd ever gone to like a pub or a bar and had a karaoke experience kind of in public with whomever is there, whoever can hear. And we had a colleague that would host the first Thursday of every month or something like that, a karaoke night with our colleagues. And it was just down the street from where we worked. And a friend of mine was like, you should try it. And I was so nervous, but I thought, I'll go for it. But this experience taught me what felt okay to choose for songs and what didn't feel okay to choose for songs. So one of the first songs that I chose was TLC Waterfalls, because I felt, now I can't see y'all, so I don't know if you're laughing at me, but don't laugh at me too much. But I felt very proud of myself that I knew the rap in the middle there. So I was like, I'm going to show off. I'm gonna do Waterfalls. So I start singing the song. And as I am singing, I noticed that my colleagues who are there kind of turn away from me and they're really interacting with each other now. They started to talk with each other. Their backs are to me and I'm still trying to sing. And I got to the rap part and I was like, I'm here. Like, watch this. And I kind of got really close to the mic and really emphasized that rap part. And I did suddenly get engagement. People did turn to look at me, but it didn't feel good. It wasn't like, oh, it wasn't what I expected when I shared that part. It was like, what is this? This is weird and loud. And I realized, oh, like in order to engage here and feel like I belong here, I have to pick different songs. Like, so instead of singing hip hop or R&B, I have to choose like Sweet Caroline. So everybody does the bop bop bops together, or Bohemian Rhapsody, or, Love Shack or Ring of Fire or something, because that's when people would engage and see me. If it was something that I chose that wasn't part of their repertoire, so to speak, it just didn't fit right. They weren't interested, or it was annoying or weird. And I thought, okay, so if I want to enjoy karaoke nights, I'm going to have to assimilate. I couldn't choose exactly what it was I wanted to choose. And even though this happened here, I've seen it in other places where, a song choice that I want isn't available because it's not mainstream or something like that. So I started to think about sharing with you how different parts of who I am are more salient in certain situations or less in certain situations. And it made me think of this concept of which me do they see? Which me do they see? And which me do I want folks to see? So, first, when I'm like at home kicking it with my family, I can be who I am 100%. authentically myself. These are my loved ones, my family, and I don't have to hide any aspects of who I am. I can be silly, I can sing what I want, and I know that I still belong. And I'm also a podcast host, as I mentioned to you. But this is where I start to curate a little bit. My podcast isn't live, so that means if something changes or I'm uncomfortable, or even with a guest, if a guest is uncomfortable, I can edit, I can produce something that has been somewhat curated, and it's maybe really specific what topics I choose or the guests that I select to come on. So it's not just the everyday Shauna. I also thought about, when I've lived outside of the US. So when I'm home with my family, the identity that's the most salient to me as a spouse or a mom, a pet owner, or I identify as a podcast host, a thought leader. But when I lived overseas, what was most salient to me was that I was a woman and that I was American, and what that looks like to people, and what how I represented myself to people in those spaces. And then in situations like this webinar, or when I'm giving facilitated talks or workshops, I'm thinking about how does my client see me as a consultant or as a coach or as a workshop leader. So we show different aspects of ourselves, I think, naturally, depending on the context. But sometimes aspects of our identity show or don't show or lead to assumptions, whether we intend them to or not. So please get your phone ready again. I want to kind of do another quick poll here. And I want you to think about which part of your identity seems to open the most doors for you. It could be, your race, your ethnicity. It could be your age. Maybe your age opens doors for you. Maybe there's an advantage there, your gender expression, or your socioeconomic status. Think about what aspects of your identity that people see or interact with you that actually are to an advantage of some kind. Now, I understand that there are so many more ways that we identify than what's on this list, which is why I have something else as an option here. And we're going to talk about this later on, like these different ways that we show up. But I just want you to think about it. Like, what is it about you that seems to open doors? And it's okay to, again, this is anonymous. Um, Sometimes there are just things that work to our advantage. So let's just take a moment and see what comes through. So far, over half of you have said something else, which is totally fair and valid, because there are a lot of something else's to us, right? But we do have folks who are saying their race or ethnicity shows up as an advantage for them, or their gender, or their socioeconomic status. Okay, just hang out here for another few seconds and see how folks identify in terms of advantage or what opens doors for you. Okay. Now I want you to think about what gets in your way. So, which aspects of your identity feel like it actually creates a barrier for you, or it's least acknowledged? So, we're going to use the same ones. Again, I know that it could be something else, but just for now, think about what aspects of your identity feel like a barrier in many of the spaces that you're in, whether that's work, social situations, etc. Yeah, so clearly with our group today, there's a shift, right? Between what is an advantage and what can be seen as a disadvantage, what opens doors and what gets in the way. And do you remember, like I showed you that slide and I was talking about, whether I'm with my family or whether I'm showing up as, a facilitator or whether I'm overseas, there are different aspects of who I am that are going to be more at the forefront of my mind, more salient to me, depending on the context, right? So in this case, we've got folks saying, okay, my race or my ethnicity tends to be a barrier in situations for me. Whereas when I asked what opens the door, it could be something else, and followed secondly by socioeconomic status. In this poll, nobody selected socioeconomic status as a barrier, right? And again, I'll keep saying this, but context matters. So thank you for participating in this. Now, let's kind of dive into identity first. Well, identity and power, because again, I don't think we can truly talk about what it is to be your authentic self and to show up authentically and um, how you communicate without talking about who we are. So this might be a familiar graphic to a lot of you, this iceberg model. And people use iceberg for a lot of things, but I think it's especially useful for today's topic because it's this idea of what is visible to others versus what is hidden to others. And there are some things that are right on the cusp, right? So the iceberg model reminds us that identity includes visible and invisible elements. And I just want to emphasize that a lot of these things are assumptions, right? So people can look at your skin color. They can look at how you express your gender, like with the clothes that you wear or how you look. They can guess what your race is, or they can guess your age, or maybe what generation you belong to based on the way that you look or how you carry yourself, and so on. But on the cusp, there are other things that people might start to make assumptions about. For example, religion is both on the visible and invisible waterline because people may not know what religion you're affiliated with, if at all, but they might make some guesses based on something you're wearing, jewelry, or so on. Same thing with your culture or even the amount of wealth you hold. They might make some guesses or some assumptions based on what they see. But the further you go down below that waterline, the more that you really have to spend time with somebody or these things have to be disclosed to truly know. Like you can't pass someone on the street and just know what their value systems are, unless there's some clue based on what they're wearing. You might take a guess, but then again, circumstantial, right? But having a conversation with somebody, getting to know them on a personal level is when you can uncover, oh, this is where their values are. This is what's important to them or their belief system. You might pass your neighbor every day and not have any idea what their work style is until you've had a conversation with them or you've worked with them. Same thing with family status. Just meeting someone or seeing someone does not necessarily indicate what their family status or marital status is, whether or not they wear a ring. Cultures are different, people are different. So there are a lot of things that we might make some assumptions on based on what we see or don't see and things that we just have to get to know somebody to understand. But I want us to take this idea of what's visible and invisible and couple that with the diversity wheel. Some of you may have seen this model before, which I really do like when we're talking about who we are and how we are different or how we are the same. So this diversity wheel expands on the idea of what's visible or invisible, right? It shows how the different dimensions of our diversity shape how we see ourselves, but also how we're seen by others. So we go from not just those visible things and those invisible things to this is me personally. Like you may not know what my physical ability is unless I share that with you or there's something that you see. Expanding out to community, right? Like, what's your social position in the community? And speaking of social, what your social life experiences are, right? Some of these things we just wouldn't know unless it was disclosed to us or we were close to someone. And then expand that even further to institutional dimensions, right? Institutions being like your education level, your work status, whether you're full-time or part-time, whether you are someone who is a visiting student, whether you work in the city or remotely or however that is, right? All of these things go from who you are as a person and expand not only out to your community and social life, but into institutions. I share this because I want to share another wheel with you, which is the wheel of power. This one is a little bit less common to see. Some of you may have seen it, but I think when we look at that outer ring, okay? Those are those identities that we've been looking at when we talked about the iceberg and the diversity wheel. Okay, these are different traits or characteristics that we hold. And this wheel of power highlights the intersection of privilege and marginalization across those dimensions. So thinking about gender, race, socioeconomic status, and these other categories, you could actually begin to plot yourself. So the closer you are to the center of this circle in each of these categories reflects how much societal power you may or may not hold. Now, this is specifically in the context of the United States. Okay, so I know that this could be, this is very general. We could argue that this, again, context matters. And so this is just very general right now, but thinking about this in the context of the US, right? So let's just pick one. And I'm just looking off to the side to pick one. Age, for example. So if you are between the age of 25 and 55, that is closer to the center of the circle. So it is likely that in most of your spaces, you hold more power than someone who is younger than 25, who might not be seen as credible or who might not be valued in terms of having enough life experience for XYZ, whatever it is. And if you're older than 55, you might be considered someone who's out of touch or who isn't with it or up to date or whatever the things, right? So just think about that so you could see how this wheel works. Same thing with location. We'll look at location. So the closer you are to a city, you might be seen as having more power and access than someone who is in a rural setting. And of course, there's all those spaces in between. And just note on this wheel that there is a difference between sex, sexuality, and gender, and where power lies. So I'll just pause for a minute. There's no poll or anything with this, but just if you were to take dots, I want you to think about in each of these categories, where would you hold more power or less power, socially speaking? And I think you are going to get a copy of this later on. I had some slides that I'm going to share with you so you can look at this again. Just take a moment and think about how you might, like if you put dots on this wheel, where your power is more likely to lie than not. And keeping this in mind, there's one more area that I'd like you to consider for context. And this identity wheel takes all those things, okay? Starting with the iceberg, what's visible, what's not visible, to what's personal and internal, to going out to institutions, to how those things might show up with power or not. And now let's add this layer of context. The outer ring shows how historical and cultural contexts influence how we show up and are perceived in different spaces. So if I were to tell you to go back to that power wheel, okay, think about where you are on the power wheel for each category and consider like world events, political events, cultural events, historical events, what you're doing at the time functionally, what's your national origin, all of those things. If you were to overlay these, how might your dots change if you think about these same categories 10 years ago? Would your dots be in different places? What about 5 years ago? What about 2 years ago? What could happen 5 years from now? The point is, who we are is basically who we are, but how we show up, how we're seen, and what our social position is can change based on context, right? Things get real when we start to look at it at this level. We show up to work with layered identities. Maybe we're multiracial, first generation, maybe we're neurodivergent or queer or multilingual. That's our truth. But the way we're treated doesn't always reflect that truth of who we are. People often make assumptions based on what's easiest to categorize because we're humans and we just do that. We categorize. But there could be a mismatch there. And that mismatch between who we are and how we're received can create that barrier to authenticity. And it's what leads folks to code switch or to hide parts of themselves or to constantly prove or feel like they have to prove that they belong. And if that's you, if that's true for you, it isn't about being overly sensitive. It's about navigating a system that doesn't always know what to do with that nuance. Okay. So here's my definition for authenticity. I think of authenticity as the alignment of one's actions, words, and behaviors with their true identity and values, regardless of external expectations. So let's now shift and talk about what gets in the way of authenticity. So I'm going to show you next a very short clip. I first saw it on TikTok, I think. And I just thought it was really illustrative because you're going to see somebody who's at work who likely, we could argue, experiences some sort of barrier to their authenticity because of some external expectations. So it's really short, like 20 seconds. Let's take a look.
This a whole life policy, and you can keep it as long as you want and never have your rates increased. Now, I want to give you a confirmation number for your protection. Let me know when you're ready.
Talk to normal voice.
What happened? Oh, really? You recording me?
Okay, so the first time that I saw that, I kind of laughed. There's this movie called Sorry to Bother You, and if you haven't seen it, the very first part of it really addresses this idea. And I'm sure lots of you have, seen things or have even experienced what it is to put on your work persona. Okay, like who you are at work versus who you are for real. And I thought that short little clip really illustrated that. But then it's important to start to think about why we might change how we present ourselves, what gets in the way. So I thought about this in terms of some basic buckets of what gets in the way of us being able to feel like we can show up as our true selves authentically. And not only what gets in the way, but like what's the impact of that? And it becomes this vicious circle. So why is it hard to be real? Well, firstly, there could be some pressure to conform, right? Again, external expectations. We might feel hypervigilant, being like super aware of context, who's around us, again, what are those expectations, and so on. We're going to dive into these a little bit deeper in a moment. But then imposter syndrome can also play a part, right? Like when we struggle with, am I enough of this? Am I too much of this? Am I good enough? All of those things. But then what's the impact? Okay. So what happens when we're not seen? And when you aren't who you are authentically, you're not being seen, right? Either you're not allowing people to see you or people cannot see you for whatever reason. And whenever you're not seen, there can be a lack of recognition to the work that you're contributing. Maybe you feel like it's not psychologically safe. And again, that vicious cycle. And then also we start to really hone in on those intersectional challenges, how our different layers of identity stack on one another. All right. So just once more, going back to this wheel, if we take a look at where we might hold power more or less in these various categories, if your dots start to go out to the outer sides, that's where you might have some intersectional barriers, things that are keeping you from being who you would like to show up as at work. So diving into this, first of all, getting in the way of authenticity is not just as simple as just being yourself. People say, just be yourself. Okay, first of all, there could be this pressure to conform. You just want to survive. Maybe you want to thrive. And for that, you might feel like I need to adapt how I speak or how I dress or how I show up in a room. And that could look like code switching where you change something about yourself. Like I used to always worry about my hair and anybody, if you all know me, I change my hairstyles all the time. But I would think about that like it was so important to me. Like if I show up with my hair naturally curly, what impression is that going to give? If it's an interview, I need it to look this way, or I need my clothes to look a certain way. You might also cover, which is different than code switching slightly. Covering is when you downplay some aspect of yourself. Think about that line of visibility. Like you start to make sure that those things at the bottom of the iceberg stay at the bottom of the iceberg. That's more like covering. And then also, you might overperform just to try to feel like, okay, I can be like everybody else here, and I don't want to be othered. You might also stay on guard. That's that hypervigilance. You don't really get to be off. Sometimes that looks like over preparing, or, if you've ever been called intense or passionate, like I've been called, you might try to hold that back a little bit because you're so worried about who's watching and what they're going to say. Did they take that the wrong way? Or, did I say that the right way? Or we might over prepare, walk on eggshells, and sometimes hold back entirely, not because we don't have something to say, but because we don't know if it's safe to say it. We don't know if our space is okay for that for us. And then on top of all of that, many of us carry imposter syndrome, and we feel like we have to prove that we belong in a certain um, situation. We have to feel like, even though we're qualified and we're educated or we have this experience, we still have to prove it. That might mean overworking. That might mean you work later than other people, longer hours, which can lead to what? You're going to be exhausted. You might dismiss compliments or second guess. Do they really mean that? Am I really good enough? Can I do this? Not because you lack ability, but because the system wasn't built with you in mind. So it's not about lacking confidence. It's really about navigating environments where it can feel risky to be yourself authentically. So what happens when we're not seen, or even our presence goes unacknowledged? Well, first, we experience this lack of recognition. We might be doing really great work, but it gets overlooked or credited to somebody else, right? Um, we find ourselves chasing extra degrees. How many letters can I put after my name? Because if I get this achievement and I do this achievement and this achievement, maybe finally that scale will tip, right? And maybe we just feel like we need that validation to be taken seriously, just to get what other people get by default. And then what happens when that happens enough? Some of us stop speaking up. We quiet our wins. We hold back, and we start to wonder if it's even worth it. We become complacent, or just like, I'm not going to show up. I'm not going to stick my neck out. I'm just going to do what I'm going to do, keep my head down. But then again, you're like walking on eggshells. You're avoiding certain topics, and you don't get to really be who you are. That's that lack of psychological safety, and feeling like if you say the wrong thing, you share too much, or challenge the status quo, there could be consequences. So we censor ourselves. We avoid these topics, certain topics. We shrink back. Okay. We make ourselves even less visible, even if we have something meaningful to offer. And again, thinking about those identity aspects, and where you hold power or don't hold power, and in which situations. Intersectional challenges mean we're often carrying the weight of more than one barrier, whether that's race, disability. In the poll, I asked you to pick one, but really you could have picked multiple things that either give you some advantage or act as a barrier to you. And that overlap creates a whole another layer of emotional labor, okay? Because it's not just one part of us that's being unseen or feeling othered. It's all of who we are. And when people aren't seen fully or fairly, it's not just demoralizing. It can lead to disengagement, to burnout, and to quiet quitting. And it's not because we don't care, but it's because we're trying to protect what's left of our energy. Energy is finite, right? If you're trying to success or be successful, you're trying to achieve, it it takes energy to do that. And if you're trying to navigate a place that doesn't feel psychologically safe, or like your work isn't recognized, you might start to pull back just to conserve energy, right? But now that we've talked about that, let's talk about claiming your voice and on your terms. And here's where I want to put that asterisk into, because it's not just about your voice, because you might hold power in certain aspects where you can uplift and amplify somebody else. So I'm going to share some thoughts with you, but not only do I ask that you think about this um, in terms of your own experiences, but think about this as you consider your colleagues or your family members, your neighbors, or other people in your life that might be at a different spot on that power wheel, where you can step in with your power to amplify them. So this can be for yourself or for others. But let's be honest, when we're talking about empowerment, it can sometimes feel like this big abstract idea. Okay, like this lofty idea, stand in your power. But the truth is, most of the power that we build actually happens in small moments and it builds truly, right? We can do that by first starting to name our wins. And this can be hard for some folks, especially if culturally you were taught to be modest, to not brag. But sharing your wins with people and what your strengths are, this is not bragging. It isn't about proving something. It's just owning what you've done well, right? It might mean speaking up in a meeting or acknowledging something you handled with care, something that you like rocked at. And those moments matter. Confidence doesn't just show up in one day, it builds over time. And you can start with like something that's low stakes or low risk, right? Just try it out. Hey, did you guys, this is so cool. I did this thing. I'd love to share it with you guys. And track your growth. You'll start to notice when it feels a little bit easier to share your strengths. And here's where I'd like to bring in that other aspect, right? This could also mean naming someone else's wins because they're not inclined to do so. Of course, find out, how a person likes for their accomplishments and their achievements to be shared, or if they do, or how you can make sure they're recognized. 'Cause not everybody likes public recognition. But if you are in a place of power and someone else isn't, you can help name their wins and whatever makes sense for them, whatever's comfortable to them. Also, build your circle, find your people. Okay. Get with the people who get you, who see you, and who remind you that you're not the only one that's navigating this stuff. It's not about fixing each other. It's about being able to show up as yourself without performing because they get you. These folks should be people who can affirm you, but also challenge you because growth comes through challenge, right? This can be mentors, allies, or affinity spaces. And this can be inside or outside of work. Think of your community. Where can you find your people? And having that support can be part of your strategy as you continue to find your voice and step into who you are authentically, the way you want to. And that brings me to my third point is showing up on your own terms. Okay, I want to be really clear here because being authentic doesn't mean you have to lay out everything for everyone. It is not everybody's business, every aspect of your life. You do not have to do that to be authentic. You get to decide how much of yourself you bring into the room. Empowerment isn't about being more, it's about having choice. And challenging norms can help you do that. Like this idea of what's professional. I did some research and I asked some women about their experiences in the workplace. And a lot of them talked about how they changed aspects of themselves, going back to the code switching, like how they dressed or wore their hair, or if they tried to hide an accent or something like that, because they wanted to be seen as professional. And my question is, what is professional? Who gets to decide what professional looks like, sounds like, what it is like? So defining what is professional can be actually a workplace project. Does it have to mean that everybody dresses a certain way or wears their hair a certain way or speaks a certain way? No, it doesn't. What does it actually mean in the context of your organization or wherever you are? And advocating for inclusive policies and behaviors that don't try to force people to assimilate into a certain culture of that professional look or that way of being. And lastly, I just want to kind of touch on this word tolerance. I really, though it has always bothered me to say we have a tolerance, because to me that word just means like putting up with. I don't want someone to put up with me. I want someone to appreciate me. And so I think it's important to normalize that we're different people. Normalize difference, not just tolerance. Okay. So as we think about what authenticity means, how we can step into our own power on our own terms, and thinking about all of these aspects of our identity where we do and don't hold power or where we can uplift others. Now let's talk about a little bit how we can communicate this, right? How we can show up. And remember, communication is more than just verbal. It's your body language, it's your written language, it's how you put yourself out there. Okay. So when we talk about authentic communication, I don't mean some polished version of vulnerability. I mean real conversations where who you are, how you speak, and what matters to you are all in alignment. And that starts with owning your own story, not the version you've edited down for resumes or intros. I used to say people have their Pinstagram, right? Like their Instagram photos or their Pinterest board that's all curated and perfect. Okay. It's the real stuff. What life experiences have shaped you, whether they've been traumatic experiences or moments of joy? All of that is part of who you are. It has helped to shape your values. It has helped to shape any major shifts you've made in your life. Think about it as your legacy or your personal brand, how you want to be known. And you can show up with your narrative with intention and not apology. Okay. It's not about hiding who you are. You don't have to explain yourself. It's just who you are. And then think about speaking with purpose. Okay. If you know who you are and you can own your story, you can speak with purpose. And that can look like maybe challenging something in a meeting or just asking a question that nobody else is asking. And it's not about being loud, it's about being intentional. Let your words reflect your values and also your behavior, the way you show up. Use tone, pace, and body language that feels true to you. And finally, it's about using your voice to create space, not just for your others, or not just for yourself, but for others too. Sometimes that means amplifying somebody else's idea or asking who's not in this room with us, who needs to be here, whose voice is missing. And when we're intentional with our voices, we don't just express ourselves, we shift the culture around us. How can I use my voice to make room for others? So I hope that these have given you some ideas as you think about who you are and how you show up. And I hope that we can keep building spaces where we don't have to leave pieces of ourselves behind. Thank you so much for showing up today exactly as you are. And I asked you how you showed up today, so I'd like to do one last check-in with you. In this 45 minutes or so, the world may not have changed, but maybe you have some new ideas. Maybe something within you has shifted. I'd like to know, what are you taking with you? So you can grab that QR code and let me know. And with that, I am ready to open it up for these last 13 minutes or so to have a discussion and answer questions. And maybe I can get some help to know, because I don't know what questions have been asked.
All right. Dr. Gann, excellent. Always. Thank you for your time and your expertise. And we'll start looking into see what questions, if any, are here.
I stopped sharing, but I'm also happy to go back and if somebody needs to see something again.
At this time, there's no questions. So what are some of the things that are out there that you think are at the forefront that we should be focusing on right now as to deal with the workplace?
One of the things that I say is for a long, long time, we've been conditioned, and I say this again from the perspective of our culture in America, typically, not to talk about certain things at work, right? Not specifically identity related things, whether that has to do with our age, like we're always trying to hide what our age is, whether we think we're too young or too old. And that extends all the way to like political affiliations and beliefs and values. And I know that those topics have typically been taboo. But I think it's a mistake to not think about those because people are bringing who they are to work. And there's a lot going on in the world. And it's a mistake to think that people are just going to set that aside. They might try to, but people go home. We don't clock in and out of our identities. People go home and they're still trying to navigate their world with all those other contexts, whether they feel like, am I literally safe? If I go to work tomorrow, is someone going to come get me? To, is somebody going to challenge something I say? Or what if, I lose friends because of who I voted for, or I'm not respected because of XYZ? So some of the things that we need to be looking at as not, I believe, not trying to turn away from what's happening in the world, but actually face it and understand that human beings are coming into their workplaces with all this stuff on their minds.
We have a question here from an anonymous attendee. The question is, if you are queer and want to be authentic in spaces where you aren't sure if you will be welcome or not, how can you definitively differentiate from when to share with others for authenticity and when not to share so you can protect your emotional and physical safety?
Yeah, that is a very good question. And it's not going to be the same answer for everybody. There are a couple of things. If we're talking about a workplace, one of the things that you can do is explore what are the values and practices. I often talk about workplace culture through the lens of Edgar Schein, and I encourage folks to look up Edgar Schein. It's a model that looks like a pyramid, okay? And the top of the pyramid is the smallest part, but that's all the visible stuff. Like if I were to go on the website, I could look at the logo and the colors and things like that. The middle is the stuff that's espoused. That's like when people post what their mission statement is or things like that. But the bottom, the biggest, is all the unspoken stuff. So if we're talking about your workplace, first you need to know what all that bottom layer stuff is. People can say that they value diversity, equity, inclusion, and all of that stuff, but how are they practicing? What clues and evidence are there? That will give you an idea of when you can feel safe to share. If it's not a workplace situation, it's a social situation, know who you're with. Because it's up to you to decide. Like, again, authenticity isn't about having to share every aspect of yourself. I say start small. You can add little bits of yourself until it feels like, oh, I don't know, am I safe to do this or not? But I think it's important that we do protect ourselves emotionally. And I think this needs to be underscored. Also, physical safety is important too.
Um, Another question is, do you have concrete suggestions for building slash rebuilding trust and authenticity in a workplace where it's historically been lacking?
Yeah. Yeah, we could talk about that, but the first thing to know is realistically, that takes a long time. Just think of like if you ever used a wire hanger, okay? Every time you bend that hanger, right? If you try to straighten it back out, you could do your best, but there's still going to be like a scar, right? And if that happens over and over again and it breaks, think about that as like breaking trust. So what's it going to take to repair that and rebuild that? It's going to take time and consistency. And there's a concept called word deed alignment. It's basically doing what you say, right? Like practicing what you preach. So leadership, I think, is really key in this. Leadership needs to lead by example and show that there is worthiness of trust again because of the consistent evidence that trust can be placed there. And because it has to be proven, it's going to take time. That means continually practicing what you preach and being consistent, not changing one thing you say to a thing that you do from time to time. Otherwise, people won't trust.
I have another one here. How do you know what the culture is in your workplace? And how do you determine if it's implicit or explicit?
So this can be answered from a couple of perspectives. Let's say you are a prospective hire or you're brand new hire and you're about to onboard. One of the things that you can do is there are actual resources out there like Glassdoor or making connections with people on LinkedIn and asking questions like, hey, I'm applying here, or I just started working here. I'd like to know what it's been like for you. How long have you been here? Can you tell me what it's like or what experiences you've had? And read some of those anonymous reviews and things like that. Although keep in mind, people tend to complain more than they give praise. So just take that for what it is. But the longer you are at a workplace, the longer you're going to understand what those implicit things are. So again, back to the Edgar Schein model, the stuff at the top of the pyramid is all the visual things. It's, does the office have open space, or is everyone closed up in offices? What are the colors? Are they bright and vibrant? Is it very formal or informal? Is remote work or hybrid work okay? Or is everyone expected to be in the office? Down to mission statement and things. But the real, like what you really learn about the culture comes over time and through building trusted relationships when people tell you what it's really like.
You have another one. How do you know what the okay, that's the same one. It's the same one. Let me go down. Okay. Said this is Pamela McAfee, doctor. Um I was I was an example of all those intersectionalities when I was in the corporate world. I had to start my own company to actually feel psychological safe in a workplace. But now many external forces are making it feel like the corporate world again, the elephant in the room. So, how does one combat intense verbal aggression?
So there are lots of layers here in this, actually. Firstly, um, corporate spaces can feel different than other workplace environments. But let's just compare what it means to work as like a W-2 employee for an organization versus what it means to work for yourself, self-employed or having your own business. And I understand why a lot of people move to starting their own company, because it could feel unsafe, or you're feeling like you're combating all of that, um, those barriers in the workplace. But what this person is saying, I believe, if I'm understanding this correctly, is now even as a person with their own business, the external forces are seeping into making their own space feel that pressure again, right? And how do you combat that? Well, I mean, the fact of it is we are going, again, I'm always talking from like what's happening in the US. So, forgive me for being that general, but it's turbulent right now out there. We are facing a lot of volatility. There are people who have power that can withstand some of these really intense things, and other folks who feel like, what can I do? And I think one of the things that you can do goes back to building your communities. Find your people. So even if you are self-employed, you can find a community of other self-employed people, other business owners, become part of organizations that have like values and systems so that you can work together to support one another. In terms of intense verbal aggression, yeah, people are out here saying some stuff. And um, part of it is knowing your truth and what actually makes you safe. And I know a lot of people say, stand up, stand up. And I say, stand up if you're safe to do so. Maybe that means that you don't always put everything out there, because you don't have to. It does not mean that you're weak or that you aren't standing in power. It means you're being safe. So find your people, build your community, have support in that way, because sometimes we do need to lean on others so that we can rest, rejuvenate ourselves, and be out there again doing the work that we do.
Dr. Gann, I just want to thank you once again for giving us your time, your expertise. That's an awesome session. And I think you put your contact information in here and things
I
like that.
Yes, I did. Let's see
Okay.
if I can do this again. So here is, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm always happy to continue conversations, or you can find me online in other ways. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Right. Once again, thank you, doctor. And we expect great things in the future with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. You too.